I guess you're wondering what chocolate kisses and peanut butter have to do with storytelling in Timbuktu. They don't have anything to do with it, but they sure do make great cookies when you're trying to tell a story. So what do you think? A little bit of an improvement? This is just one of the masks that I picked up in West Africa and Mali when I went traveling there for Lutheran World Relief. That's where I started my storytelling, and I actually got to go to Timbuktu. So a lot happened on this trip. I thought I was going to be telling you more about the stories of the people of West Africa, but what I'm really going to tell you about is some of the challenges that I experienced as a videographer and storyteller. Stepping out on an adventure like that to tell the stories of other people was a big challenge for me. I'd never been into a developing country before. So my first time there, I remember landing in West Africa on the airstrip in the middle of the evening. It was an unusual way to get off the airplane. We got off the airplane on stairs right on the tarmac, and I knew that we had to go through customs. I had a bunch of camera equipment with me. I wasn't sure how that was going to go. But what was unusual is as we got to the place where everybody else was lining up to go into customs, we were sort of escorted off into a different area, so I wasn't sure what was going to happen. So we gathered up our gear and we put it into the vehicles and we started to head down the streets towards our hotel. And I noticed that there was this blue haze and these groups of people as we were driving by. They were all gathered around a television set and they were watching the World Cup soccer tournament that was happening in Mali at that time. So for them that was a very proud moment, the place where the community was coming to get together. And I started to notice that we were driving by shacks and buildings that were sort of put together in makeshift fashions. And then off in the distance I saw this majestic building. It was the World Bank building, and it towered over everything else in the city. I couldn't see much, but that building was well lit that evening. So we got to our hotel, we checked in, it seemed like the people had just woken up just to let us in because we were really late. We got comfortable and I sat on the edge of the bed just wondering, what was this experience going to be like? What we wanted to do was film how these material resources that were delivered from the United States would be distributed through the country. We captured a little bit of footage of a ceremony, and then the material resources were being loaded onto a truck, and then we wanted to film the truck drive away. And so we did that part of it, and I had all my camera gear out. It was a little bit larger. We weren't using DSLRs back then, we were using shoulder mount cameras. And so I had all this stuff that I had taken a lot of time to set up, and I didn't have time to tear it down. I was supposed to be in the truck with my interpreter and with my colleague, but somehow they said we have to go now because we're going to make our first stop and we want to film that as well. So I didn't have time to put the camera away. So here I was with this big rig and I'm sitting in the back seat, and somehow I got separated from my colleague and I got into a car that didn't have an interpreter. So it was me, this non-French speaking person, sitting in the back with a camera with two people in the front who only spoke French. So we started to drive on, and I kind of knew that I wasn't supposed to film anybody of political importance. I had forgotten that the local police officers were also included in that group, so I figured since I had my camera out and I wanted to get some B-roll footage, we'd be driving down and I would just let my camera run while we were going. We got to an intersection and there was this young police officer there, and he had spotted that camera like an eagle. So I had stopped my camera and I just, all kinds of thoughts went through my head. What was I going to do? What was I going to do? What was going to happen to me? I had heard some horror stories about, you know, you get thrown into jail, they take your passport, nobody knows where you're at, and you know, so I'm running through all these things as a rookie going through the situation. So I'm sitting in the back. The police officer's talking to the driver. I couldn't understand what they were saying. So the police officer walks around and he taps on my window. I roll down my window, and like a fool, I use the only phrase that I kind of know in French, and I say, bonjour. And so he immediately starts talking to me in French very fast, and then I'm just shaking my head like, I don't know what you're saying. And I could tell he was angry, and he kept pointing at my camera. And then unfortunately, the two people in the front didn't speak English very well at all, and they weren't able to communicate with me what was going on. So the police officer and one of the people in the vehicle were arguing back and forth, and I knew I had to do something. So I took the tape out of the camera and I stuck it into my pocket, thinking, oh no, officer, there's nothing in the camera, there's no tape in here. He came back and he wanted to see the camera. So I show him, I turn it on, it's a blue screen, and I pop open the slot, and he starts insisting that there had to have been a tape in there, that I was recording the whole time. I'm thinking, yes, there was a tape in there, and I hope you don't pull me out of this vehicle because I have the tape in my pocket, and once you find it, then you're going to be very upset. So the driver of my vehicle was doing his best to try to help us get through the situation. The police officer's yelling at me. I'm not understanding what he's saying. He's yelling back at the driver. The driver's looking at me, and in his very broken English, he goes, Eric, you know film. It's like, no, yeah. My conscience got the best of me, so I said, yes, I did. I was filming the road, and I did not get the police officer. Well, the police officer wasn't sure. He trusted me, so he wanted me to put the tape back in the camera and play it for him through the viewfinder. So I rewound the tape, and I'm playing through the street scenes, and he's watching it, and he's going, I was like, please don't let him be on there, please don't let him be on there. And then as soon as he saw his blue shirt, he just went into a tirade again and started yelling and everything, back and forth, back and forth. So the driver and the other person in the vehicle were having a conversation back and forth. I was hoping I wasn't going to jail. So I rewound the footage a little bit, and I filmed my knee over top of it. And then I scrubbed back, and I waved him over and showed him that it was erased, that he was no longer there. He was still angry. So they put the dignitary who was in the other vehicle on the phone with the police officer. They hashed it out, and then they were laughing back and forth, the driver and the police officer, and I'm sitting there like nervous as all, wondering what the heck was going on. Why are they laughing now? What's so funny? And then the driver gets back in the car. I roll up my window. Apparently we're allowed to go, and the driver gets back in the car and he says, you know, all he wanted to do was for you to pay a fine, you know, pay him a little bit under the table, and then we could have been on our way. You know, it's kind of like stupid American thing. But anyway, that was my first lesson in negotiation. One of the major parts of this trip for me was the ability to get on an airplane, a smaller airplane, and fly out to Timbuktu. Now, you heard about Timbuktu growing up as a kid as if it's this mystical place that it exists in the desert, and you can only see it whenever the sun shines in a certain way, and there's oases, and people get lost and they die of thirst because they're trying to find Timbuktu. Well, it turns out there is an airport. We flew into it. I had my interpreter Yushao with me. Here's a picture of us together. He pretty much saved my life on a daily basis. Once again, we got into Timbuktu, and I had my camera equipment with us. We went through customs. They scanned our passports, and they picked up the phone. And for some reason, we weren't going through. They picked up the phone. We were just made to stand there and wait. The next thing I know, I see this pickup truck full of people with machine guns driving towards us, and then they let us through. They're like, okay, you go with them. Wait, we're gonna go with the people with the machine guns? What is going on? These aren't the people we're supposed to meet here. We have our interpreter. We're supposed to get a ride over to our hotel. That's all that's supposed to happen. So we're in the truck, and Yu Xiao, the interpreter, is telling me, in his nice way of saying it, he says, "This is BS. We're gonna go and we're gonna meet with the local prefect." We were with our partner, who is a local government official, and he's talking to the prefect, and these other men walk in with very ornate clothing on, but they also had machine guns, and they're sitting down there, and the prefect and our partner were speaking back and forth, and they were speaking in their own language, and they were sort of very, very serious. They were very serious, talking back and forth, and my interpreter's whispering kind of what they're saying in my ear, and he goes, don't worry, they're just telling your mama jokes." And I was like, "What are you talking about?" And as soon as they saw me laughing, they started yelling at the interpreter, "Don't you tell him what we're saying." So the reason I liken it to your mama jokes is because they were sort of playing off of their culture, where they can have multiple wives, and then they go through the lineage, and they kind of say, "Well, you know, if you're gonna make fun of my mom, well, she might be related to you anyway, so you know, so you're making fun of yourself," I guess is the story. And I started to realize that this was going to be a common thing. This was going to be something that kept happening. So the prefect escorts us to our hotel, and as we're driving away from the prefect's barracks, or whatever you would call them, we started to drive up over the sand, and then there it was, Timbuktu, right in front of us. It's this fortress of a city that's built all by hand. It's made by mud bricks, and it was mesmerizing. I'd never seen anything like it before. And there were some towered structures in there that were local architecture to the area that I had never seen before, almost like pyramid structures. Timbuktu does exist. I got to see it firsthand. Drove up to our hotel and unpacked for the day, and so I got to relax, and I was quick to write down these stories about everything that happened to me in one day. It was just unreal. We loaded up a couple of boxes into trucks that they had provided, and we got into the trucks, and just as we were pulling out of the hotel, the trucks got stuck in the sand, and so we had to jump out and do some pushing. It was just another thing that was happening along the way. So at some point that day, we were supposed to get back to the airport that was in town in order to get a flight back to our next destination, where we were doing some more work. Because they wanted us to do this ceremony that was not on our schedule, we were kind of stuck there wondering, all right, so now we have to find a way back. And I remember the interpreter leaning over to me and saying, "Don't worry, I know this is a little bit of a hiccup, but let me go talk to the prefect, and let me tell him what an important man he is, and what power he has in order to make things right for these travelers." And so what he did was he went over and talked to the prefect. I don't know what exactly he said, but the next thing I know, the prefect had given us his brand new Toyota Tacoma pickup truck and his driver. The only problem is that we were not supposed to be on the desert roads in the middle of the night. That was one of the policies that we had. He assured us there was no problem. We were going to get to our destination. We got into the pickup truck. We had everything strapped down, driving as fast as we could to get to the ferry boat before it took off, because if we missed this one, it was going to be late at night before we could catch another one. We're pulling up to the location, and there the boat is just slowly drifting off. It has already left port. So we waited several hours. Finally, the last ferry boat of the evening showed up, and we were able to get our vehicle onto the boat, and we were on our way across the river. It was a very quiet river ride. The moon was out, reflecting off the water, and it was kind of lighting up the whole scene for us. We got to the other side of the shore, and the driver was driving pretty fast. He had to keep going so that the truck didn't get stuck into the sand, and so we're bounding over the sand dunes, and we're coming down pretty hard over and over again. We're just like slamming down. You can imagine like four people's heads just kind of bobbing around like this the whole trip. We're going as fast as we can so that we don't get stuck on the road. As the truck would come down, you would hear this grinding noise, and we weren't sure what it was. Turns out it ended up being that they broke the engine block mount on a brand new Toyota Tacoma, and the fan from the front of the engine was hitting the hood of the truck. They tried several things in their ingenuity. They opened up the hood of the truck and They got out a floor jack that would be used to change a tire or something like that, and they wedged the engine back into place, and we were on our way again, and we were bounding over the dunes again, and then eventually it gave way, and we weren't sure what we were going to be doing. So here we are in the desert road. We were told we shouldn't be there in the middle of the night because of bandits. We're sitting in the truck. My colleague was a female, and she was very tired. She had the door open as they were trying to figure out what to do with the truck. They were arguing, the partner and the driver were arguing on how best to fix the truck. And we would see headlights come, every now and then would come, and then just keep driving by. They had to keep moving, and they couldn't stop. It was a long period of time where there was nothing, and then we'd see these two single headlights coming over the ridge, and I'm thinking, boy, I really hope this is somebody nice and not some bandits. And then this little vehicle, pretty much a Suzuki Sidekick, came towards us, and there were a lot of men piled up on top of this vehicle, and I'm thinking, oh no, this could be it. And these men pulled over. Some of them got off the top of the truck, and they started walking around to where my colleague was sitting in the front. She was actually asleep, and I'm standing between the door and her, trying to block these men from getting close to her. They were making kissing sounds, and they were saying things like, New York, New York. I guess they make generalizations about us as well. So I kept walking around, and luckily the driver of their vehicle got out and was starting to talk to our driver. And our driver had showed them what he had done to keep the engine block in place, and then over a course of time they had made some discussions and were arguing themselves as well. But then the driver of the other vehicle actually came up back with a bolt in his hand and a big wrench, and they tried it to see if it would fit the bolt that had busted on ours, and sure enough it did fit. They tightened it up, they shook hands. We tried to give them some cash that we had to say thank you, and we were on our way. As we were driving on, the moon was lighting up everything. I was seeing some amazing things I had never seen in my life. We're in the desert, so it's flat forever. Then all of a sudden there were these huge plateaus that just kind of jutted up out of the desert. They were like mountains in the middle of nowhere. And so we could see them plain as day because of the moonlight. We were all very tired. We got to our destination. We had a little bit of arguments between all of us because we had lack of sleep and expectations on what should have happened and what didn't happen. And I remember meeting with Yushao by the river the next day, and we were just kind of sitting there. He was angry because some words were said to him, and we had a conversation, and then we just kind of agreed that everything was going to be okay, and we were thankful for one another, and we're sitting by the river, and we enjoyed some breakfast that day. I just wanted to tell everybody my story. That's an unusual story. It's not one that everybody will get a chance to go through in their lifetime. So I thought about, what if I never captured my story? What if the only stories that I captured were the people that I visited? And I thought, you know, I know the story in my head, I've told it a couple times, but will that story live on? So by having a YouTube channel and by being a creator, by having this space in order to tell these stories, I'm able to capture it and hold on to it. Don't wait just because you think your story's not as interesting as somebody else's. What you have to say matters to somebody. So get out there, participate, create, educate, and escape, and we'll see you next time. My friend here says, please remember to subscribe to the channel and like the content that inspires you. No, I don't think you can have one. You're allergic to peanuts, but I can. Good story.